fretting, okay? And at the end, I will carry out a critical assessment of the use of these artificial neural networks. We have been seeing it being used a lot nowadays, sometimes in a way that I believe is not the best way possible. So I will leave a message as well, the way I see it, and that we have to have some critical evaluation of its use to mechanical problems like fatigue, fretting fatigue, okay? Well, quickly, this is the outline of the presentation, right? Well, so an introduction to the fretting fatigue problem for those who are not very familiar with it. So the term fretting itself denotes a very small relative movement between contacting surface. So to have fretting, you must have a coupling. Here, I use an example of a cylinder against planes, a configuration that we use a lot in the labs. So usually you have a normal load, and then you must have a cyclic or time varying tangential load that will provoke small displacements between the contact surface if they are small enough, and if this load is smaller than the Coulomb limit load, okay, coefficient of friction times normal load, then it's going to produce a mixed zone where you're gonna have partial slip at the borders of the contact and a stick zone in the middle, right? So here you get some surface damage, but you also get stress concentration, okay, in these points within the slip zone. So you have very high localized stress. However, this stress decays very quickly. So the crack initiates in these slip zones, usually within the slip zones, and it will be further propagated by a bulk remote fatigue load. So to have fretting fatigue, you also must have a remote bulk load together with the contact loads, okay? If you don't have this load, the crack will initiate and it will stop because these contact stresses are extremely localized, right? Well, so somehow the fretting fatigue problem is very similar to the notch fatigue problem. You have stress concentration, you have a strong stress decay. So both problems have a number of similarities, but in fretting you have this superficial wear that's not very big. Is a small wear on the surface. Very briefly, some very common problems that we have in practical components due to fretting fatigue. This is the example of the connection between blade and disc in aero engines. So as the aircraft takes off, the rotational speed will increase. You have a opening of these slots. The blade will go up due to the centrifugal force. During cruising, this blade will bend in one direction and in the second direction, causing small relative displacements in these contact zones. So usually, and then you have the landing, it all repeats again and again and again. So sometimes you have fretting fatigue cracks starting these positions, and then you get very big problems like these ones, and you will see that they were very recent. This is in 2016, this is 2018, very close together in the same aircraft company in US, okay? These images are in the internet, in the newspapers, and in the second case, we had a very bad accident. If you see here, the blade was released, and very likely to the fretting problem. They don't say clearly, but very likely. And this blade released, broke a window, and a woman who was here had half of the body out of the aircraft for some time until people could rescue her during the flight, but it was too late, so unfortunately she died. So these problems may have very hard consequences. This is another example, very familiar. Most of you who work with fatigue have seen that. In rivet lap joints, you usually have fretting fatigue due to the contact of the lap joints themselves, due to the contact of the head of the rivet with the lap joint, and due to the body of the rivet with the lap joint. So you have these things that people call multi-site damage, but where cracks are initiated by fretting fatigue. So fretting fatigue in the aircraft industry is considered a plague. There are many components that suffer from fretting fatigue in the aircraft industry. Well, this is another very interesting problem, fretting fatigue in overhead conductors. So how it occurs? So the wind comes. This is the conductor. It stays attached to the towers by these clamps. So you have the aeolian vibration that will cause a bending up and down here of the conductor. So you have bending stresses, plus you have the contact stresses due to the contact of the conductor with the lower and upper part of the suspension clamp. But you also have contact between the wires themselves in different layers. So all these contacting points become possible crack initiation sites due to fretting. Okay? Here, there is a more, I hope it will work. You see the clamp? This is the wind provoking the aeolian vibration. You will see that. That is that's quite nice. You can see how it vibrates. And then they attach to the clamp here. And then you get this sort of fretting fatigue damage. This is the aluminum oxide. That's a clear indication that this assembly is suffering from fretting fatigue. This is how we do these tests in the University of Brasilia. We have 3 banks like this. Here we control the displacement. Here is the attachment. We put strain gauges. We have 3. We call it resonant banks. Very interesting, that laser, because it's when you have the break of the wires, it occurs inside the clamps. You cannot see it. So we need to detect it by using some sort of rotational sensor that will detect that one wire broke. Then the conductor will experience a small rotation. And then we use those lasers to measure the displacements and compute an angle, a rotation angle. So we know that the wires are breaking, okay? So we have developed these 3 overhead conductors, fretting fatigue banks over there to study these problems. We also carry out numerical problems concerning this. But I came here to talk about the 4 actuators fretting fatigue rig and some tests that we did using this. So the first thing to do, what configuration will I use for the contact problem? Will I use flat against flat surface? Will I use sphere against flat? Will I use cylinders against flat? So the first decision to build it is to decide for the contact configuration. So we didn't want to use flat against flat because they are very hard to align. Any small difference, if the surfaces are not parallel by any small angle, you have very high stress gradients. If you have any contamination in the surface, this will provoke misalignment that causes a very strong difference in the pressure distribution. So we don't want to use it. Most of the tests carried out under this configuration for ranking, just ranking. This material resists better to fretting than the other one, and so on. Most of the data available in the literature consider either cylindrical or spherical pads because these misalignments are much smaller, okay? And when they occur, they are very localized. They don't change the pressure distribution as a whole, but just locally in that point where the misalignment is occurring. Most of the data are here, and this type of tests have been conducted mostly with one single actuator machine, and then you usually put some pins attached to the cylinders to generate the fretting load. So this is a quite limited way of doing the test, because always this load will be in phase with the remote bulk fatigue load. So this limits a lot. So what we want to do was to produce a machine where you could vary any of these loads with time. There are some machines around that can vary the Q, the tangential, and the bulk stress load in phase, out of phase, synchronously, asynchronously. These are called two actuators fretting rigs, but they cannot change the normal load, which is also another limitation. So we wanted something extremely flexible where I can change any of these loads in any way. So that's the rig we have been working on. Very briefly, this is a specimen we call fretting specimen. Here are the cylindrical pads. I think I didn't mention, why don't you use spherical ones? Because in the spherical ones, the spheres are more difficult to produce, and I usually have to consider an axisymmetrical analysis, which is, well, more difficult to work with than the cylinders that I can work in 2D, okay? So we have considered the cylinder against plane configuration. These are what we call cylindrical pads. These are normal loads that I can apply using actuators number 9. They are servo-hydraulic actuators, completely independent from the other actuators. Here I have the actuator number 3. These are the jaws. Actuator number 3 is connected to jaw number 7, where I apply the bulk fatigue load. Here is the bulk fatigue load being applied to this specimen. So the specimen is connected to jaw number 6, and jaw number 6 is fixed. I don't move it. But I have a 4th actuator on the top that's connected to these bars to all the fretting device. So I can use this actuator to apply the tangential load to the pads. So 4 independent actuators that can move in any way, synchronously, asynchronously, in phase, out of phase, okay? And we also have, as you see at the end, we have a cooperation with Safran Aircraft Engines. So they requested us to do some tests at 540 degrees. So we need to heat up the tests. And to do that, we use these igniters, okay? Here, the way they stay in the fretting device, we usually have this casing to avoid the loss of heating and to keep the temperature stable. And here we have a thermocouple where we control the temperature, okay? Here is the photo of the machine. So that's the schematic drawings that I showed, now the photos. So, and we also use some water systems to cool down the connections and avoid any expansion, metal expansion during the test of the device, okay? So the test will be conducted in this machine, and we want to produce this that we have called aircraft-like loadings. So the specimen is this one, is aluminum 7075 T651. These are the dimensions, mechanical properties. If you want to see more details about the load conditions, they are in the PhD thesis of my student, Giorgio. And so the way we applied the loads was, we applied the bulk fatigue load together and in phase with the normal load to clamp the pads against the specimen, and when they were at the maximum value, we applied high frequency fretting loads, okay? And then we repeated this until the complete failure of the fretting specimen. And we get some very interesting type of crack initiation. This is the view of the one side of the specimen, the other side. You can see that the problem is quite symmetrical. You have crack initiation at one side of the contact, at the other side of the contact. They grow together and join. This is second day of test, third day of test. So you see that there is a lot of crack propagation staging there. You can see the crack and the test keeps going on. Here's a zoom of the crack region. Well, very quickly, and at the end you have this detached triangular part. Here you can see the slip zones. So the cracks started within the two slip zones, and all the tests have this type of these characteristics. At the end, you could get this triangular bit coming out of the specimen. We also measure the angles, right? So you could measure the angles as an average 60-something degrees is the complementary angle of this one, okay? We use a confocal laser microscope to measure the angles. And the modeling, how we try, what we call this hybrid critical plane artificial neural network. So we work out using finite element analysis, the time varying stress tensor at the critical distance. We have the father of the critical distance theory here, Dave, so it's a pleasure to see him. And so we do that to capture stress gradient characteristics, okay? Then, as you know, some of the critical plane models, they usually consider the amplitude of the shear, so the largest amplitude of the shear stress in a material point, in a material plane, combined with the maximum normal stress on the same plane as the driving force for crack initiation. So the physics of the problem will be captured by introducing these two variables computed at the critical distance point as input variables to my artificial neural network, and we also use the yield stress as a third input to differentiate between materials. Okay, obviously there is an implicit fourth parameter in there associated to these two. That's the critical distance itself. Okay, let me try to go. And the output of the network is life, initiation life, right? So to train the network, we used 132 data coming from aluminum alloys, lots of different aluminum alloys, under loading conditions that have nothing to do with the loads that the aircraft type of loading I used for my test, for this specific test that we did here. We separated 24 of this data, didn't allow the network to see it at the beginning. And we could see when we apply the network to this, what we call 24 data that it never saw, we can see that the life predictions are very, very reasonable. Here is experimental life against estimated life. Okay, all the other data were used to the training. And then we see, but can this network be generalized? Can it be applied to more complex geometries, loading conditions, and loading cases as well, and materials? So we tried to use the same artificial neural network trained with just aluminum alloys under more classical fretting load conditions. So I took that artificial neural network and tried to estimate life for titanium 6-4, Inconel at high temperature, okay? And also with more complex loading conditions, now I have the normal load varying as well. I also used spherical data, okay, and try to predict the life for these materials and geometries that the network never saw. These are the results for titanium. Excellent in terms of the blue. This is experimental against predicted life, experimental against estimated life. Here, titanium with spherical pads, titanium 6-4 with cylindrical pads. Here, Inconel and titanium with varying normal loads. So you can see both, well, this square is for analytical models, okay? You can see here modified Euler curve, Fatemi-Saucy, the open circle here, open, well, symbols are for classical analytical models, and these ones filled in are for artificial neural networks. So you see the predictions are excellent. So life is solved. We don't need to do anything more. We can go home. No, you see it's not like that. Now I'm going to apply this methodology to the same methodology, the same neural network that seems excellent, to the previous data that I showed at the very beginning with the aircraft-like loading, okay? How we do that? Similar thing, finite element analysis, remembering that the load is this one, okay? The contact configuration is cylindrical, so we do here the finite element, compute the time varying stress tensor at the critical distance and using critical plane models. I also use the Smith-Watson-Topper modified Euler model in my artificial neural network, and each loading block, the damage provoked by each damming block was computed like this, where life N1 and N2 were estimated either by these models, okay, and at the end I could compute the number of blocks of loadings that I could have until the end of the test, okay? So here are the models that I used, the analytical ones, and these are, finally, I'm at the very end of the presentation. So here is my experimental life, estimated life, okay? For those block loadings with the different loading conditions that I used. And you can see the artificial neural network, with the blue circle, open blue circle, and the half-filled blue circle. It didn't behave so well in this case, right? I will discuss that. We did a correction for the mean stress level that was high in this test, and that my artificial neural network didn't see when it was trained. When you do this correction, it works well, works better, right? Also, the modified Euler curve model applied at the critical distance worked reasonably well when at the limit, because it has a limit rho. This rho measures the influence of the mean stress. So if you stop the influence of the mean stress at a certain level, it works, okay? It works well. Well, so to conclude, the artificial neural network has been used a lot, but we need to have some mechanical understanding of our problem and to see the limitations of its use. I have considered a network to compute crack initiation. My governing parameters were shear stress amplitude, maximum normal stress, that are variables used to compute initiation life. As I showed the propagation stages of these tests, you could see the crack grow in the second day, third day, okay? So it was mainly a crack propagation problem, right? So I don't believe we can use in a generalized way any artificial neural network without some mechanical basis and understanding the problem we are applying it for. So it's a sort of critical message that I leave. And to conclude, in the last international conference, before the last one, in New Orleans, 2022, I saw a colleague using an artificial neural network with 32 input variables and life as the output, okay? This is, nonsense. Most of the input variables were chemical composition of the material. And then I asked the colleague, why not just the yield stress? Just the yield stress is mechanically more sensible, and you exchange 28 of your variables by 1. That would be the yield stress. So people are using it in a way that I don't think is very reasonable. So we need to, it's nice, but you have to have mechanical understanding of what you are doing and consider input variables that make sense to the problem that you are studying. So thanks a lot again, Berto. These are some of our sponsors that I also thank. Thank you.